it's clear and obvious that Brian Kelly is not engaged with this team. He is not connected to this team. There have been chirps, and we talked about it last week. There are a lot of people that talk about Brian Kelly as being out of touch, not around the program. And you don't have to go very far to find those people. I mean, it's a common theme around Kelly that he spends a lot of time in the offseason on the golf course. He spends a lot of time in season at home fairly early in the day. And for the most part, he just lets his coaches coach. He's almost made reference to it in press conferences leading into the season. Like, I got to get to my day job, or I'll cancel that tee time, or I guess I'll get off the golf course. Kind of ha, ha, ha. And people are kind of like,
not funny, Jimmy.
Not real funny, because that's the word on the street. Like, that's kind of the reputation. And to me, it looks that way now on the sideline. Like, the meltdown with him and Hilton, the meltdown with him and Lacey, I'm not naive to the fact that stuff does not happen in competition. I've seen and been a part and on sidelines, in huddles. I've seen how that stuff works. I know that stuff is edge. It's high temper, high intensity. But this is such a bad look for Kelly in the way that he does not seem like he's engaged and connected with his team, and that's the only time you see him. Is when he's in their ass, or when he's lighting them up, or when he's getting after Garrett Nussmeier, or when he's getting after Chris Hilton, or when Kyron Lacey's getting after him.
Like you real quick, like, you have time to do what you did to Chris Hilton, but you don't have time to go check on your quarterback after a concussion test? Like, where are your priorities? What are you doing? You're a quarterback guy, right? Garrett Nussmeier is the leader of your football team, and he has a concussion test. You don't even have the gall to go over there and look at him. Ask him, how you doing? Where are you? How do you feel? Nothing. I'm going to keep coaching over here. My little play sheet.
Spectrum Well Care. Come on, Jordy. Saban did that every game. He did. But Saban was also the king of building you up. If you ever want a great example of Nick Saban, go back to the 2003 Georgia game in Tiger Stadium, the day game, the one everybody talks about. He comes out to the hash mark and lights Travis Daniels up, embarrasses him on national television in front of the home crowd, is in his face, jumping around, barking, puts the headset over his ear, the whole thing. A terrible look. In the fourth quarter, Travis Daniels makes a play right in front of the bench. Nick Saban standing over the top of him, hitting him in the helmet, slapping him on the head, picking him up, telling him good job, cheering him back on. I'm not naive to the fact that stuff does not happen. In fact, I want the coach of the team to have the relationship to be able to get in the ass of the big-time players. I thought that it wasn't that bad of a look a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about Kelly getting after Nussmeier. I spun it and said, look, Nussmeier's been coached like that his entire life. He comes from a coaching family. His dad's a coach. His dad played quarterback. His dad coaches at an elite level. I'm sure Brian Kelly understands he can have those conversations with Garrett Nussmeier at that intensity level. To me, Chris Hilton ain't made for that, like that at that moment. Chris Hilton knows he messed up. Chris Hilton knows he's trying to get back. He knows he's mistimed his jumps. He knows he's got to make those catches. Like, that was a bad look. And I've never seen the other side of Kelly being shown, where he's urging, encouraging, pepping, talking. And I'm not saying that it doesn't exist at all. But look at the national media today on LSU. Brian Kelly is easy to hate. The national media have it built in that he's an asshole, that he's a dickhead. That's the storyline on him. That's always been the storyline on him. He's tried to combat that at LSU, in my opinion, with his public appearances. Whether it's happened locally to some degree, nationally it has not caught on. And when things happen like it did yesterday for his team, he is very easy to pile on nationally. It's caving in on LSU nationally. I'm not saying by any means that the wheels are off and that you got to burn the thing and that they're not going to win another game ever. I'm not saying that. But if you listen to the national outsiders who aren't really in touch with the program, they're betting on it. They're hoping for it. They're looking at Kelly and saying, something doesn't look right with this cat. And I agree. I think that Brian Kelly was, and we've talked about this so many times, and I don't want to, replay the narrative, but Brian Kelly was the right guy for the job at the time when he got it. There were so many things that needed to be overhauled and cleansed at LSU football. Kelly was the guy that Scott Woodward gave the machete to and said, you go be the bad guy. You fire Sharon Mangum. You you put in another spot Miriam Seeger. You move these people that LSU couldn't touch because legally it was going to come back on them. Just like Woodward, I'm sure, told Brian Kelly in the interview, you might be called to the witness stand at some point. But we're going to put you in a position where you're just coming in to clean up the program. And we're going to give you $100 million and guarantee all that money to you for doing that. And how is Brian Kelly going to say no to that? I'm not getting into that stuff of it. But in the third year, in my opinion, it looks as if that is what this was about. And it's not necessarily about the football. I can tell you what Brian Kelly is going to say in that press conference tomorrow, as I could tell you what he was going to say last night after the loss. All those things are fine to hear, but there's no progress or no momentum that seems to be happening on the field. Just some numbers over the last 3 games. LSU has been outscored 100-35 over the last 10 quarters. They've scored 3 touchdowns on their last 27 drives. They've allowed 11 sacks over the last 3 games. They've allowed 22 tackles for loss over the last 3 games. If we're going to start the issue of what's broken for LSU football, we're starting with the offense. That's where the discussion is. The defense was building its way back from the worst year in season's program history. And to have Florida at 13 points for 3 quarters of that game is a win. Like, that's a win. If you tell Garrett Nussmeier going into the week, like, hey, we're going to hold them to 13 for you for 3 quarters. You and your boys get out and jump out into a lead, especially if you're going to hold the ball for 35 minutes of the game. I mean, how LSU got beat in that game last night is it's a mind pretzel. I mean, you look at the stat sheet, you look at the time of possession, you look at the yardage, you look at the first downs, you look at the stats that really matter when you're talking about, hey, who won the game? LSU beat the ever-living hell out of them on the stat sheet. But then got on the field again and just lost its mind in key spots and key downs where they couldn't convert and couldn't score. I mean, it's maddening to see what the problems are on this team of not being able to convert. I mean, going back to what we said, there's so much that kind of went into yesterday that you can just kind of jump into a buffet of topics, but I knew it was going to go bad when Womack wasn't making the trip. Swinson wasn't starting. Ryan wasn't starting for the reasons that Lon Sullivan details today that we were hearing yesterday, like, when asking, like, what's going on here? Like, what is this? And it was like, it's the same type of, kind of Mickey Mouse type stuff of being late, no effort, like, what? Not traveling those guys to a league game when you're still alive for a championship hunt? Like, how does that make any sense at all? Like, that's mind-boggling. That's crazy. Okay, well, that happens. Then you go to Florida, you get the ball, and you're moving on that first series. You're stuck 4th and 1, a long one. Like, I mean, that was a long, long yard. You call a timeout, and out of a timeout, that's the play call? Like, am I the only one? But I could feel it kind of right then where it was like, oh, they're desperate. They're in trouble. Like, they're in big trouble. I felt it last weekend versus Alabama. I know that game was close. I know that game was from a score standpoint, LSU still had their opportunities. But to me, last week, I mean, I told the guy sitting right next to me after the second series, LSU's in big trouble tonight. Like, they're getting shoved around. They're on both sides of the ball. There's just something's off. Something's not right. Yesterday, again, same thing. Out of a timeout, jet sweep, running east and west. Lose yardage on 4th and 1. Don't even sniff it. Like, this is going to be a long day.
When you go into a 4th and long one, like you said, where's your biggest problem up front? Can you riddle me that?
Interior?
Yes, I would say your front 3 offensive linemen, Miles Turner, also out of the game. And you're like, let's line up for what the only time you've ever gotten under center has been to do what? You do a quarterback sneak. That's not the strength of your offensive football team. It's the biggest weakness you have on the team. So you call a timeout whenever you look over there, Ed Anderson's uncovered. Like, you could get it out there. Okay, timeout, fine. So we're going to burn a timeout 3 minutes into the game in the first quarter, which has been a problem for you all year. And then you line up in a play where you get it to Xavier Thomas, who's been good for you in the rush game, but you only give it to him once or twice. You have that play called, but who's the end? Blocking that you put in motion. Somebody that you made a wide receiver that was a tight end, but he doesn't do this well. That's Trey'Dez Green that you have trying to, like, seal the edge for you on a 4th and 1 play. Like, you have to know your personnel, and that's where it starts with Brian Kelly. He doesn't know who the fuck his players are. Like, you have to know that Trey'Dez Green doesn't do that well. But you with your little play sheet now, you're like, well, no, I like this one. This is part of your first 15. These are your scripted plays.
Yeah.
And you come out of a timeout and go, this is what I want to roll with. I'm cool. But you got to know who's in and who's out. Who's 14 again?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's
he's playing himself as a fool.
It's very evident. And, Kelly, for really all intents and purposes, is kind of exposing himself in this whole scenario. I mean, this feels very it does, and look, I mean, don't think that it doesn't haunt me to say this, but this feels very Les Miles-ish in the sense of where Kelly is just a better public speaker.
And now he's getting worse at that.
I mean, he's just more well-spoken than Miles was, but when it comes down to the football stuff, there's not a lot of development that's being taking place. I understand Jaden Daniels was here for Brian Kelly in his first 2 years, and that was a quarterback that really developed. I mean, look, those guys were top 15 picks and top 25 picks and very special players. And I'm not discrediting the coaching that went in to obviously developing those guys, but the look over the last couple of weeks, whether it was Blake Baker and Brian Kelly being shown at Texas A&M, kind of staring into space with the look of they don't have the answer, to once again that same look last week in Baton Rouge where Baker and Kelly are looking at Jalen Milroe slash him up one more season, to having Brian Kelly with the headset on, with the play sheet in his hand, with Kyron Lacey coming off the field and barking into his ear. I mean, the optics of LSU football the last couple of weeks has been very, very difficult to take in. I mean, like, it's been very hard to watch and say, this looks like a program that has all of its organization in line. I mean, having Whit Weeks speak to the press yesterday and have him say one side of the defense is running one thing, the other is running another. Look, man, that's stuff that even if it's happening, there has to be some type of, they talk about standard of performance, standard of effort. There has to be some standard of communication. Like, you can't be letting that stuff out in the public. Like, we got to be tied tighter than that, right? When they clearly are not. They clearly are not. I mean, this is a team that looks very unbound. It looks very, independent of one another. And it really starts with Kelly. I mean, it starts with Brian Kelly. I mean, it starts at the top. But, one thing that has to be understood and that, all discussion has to be out of the window when it comes to nobody's getting fired. Nobody's losing their job. Nobody is getting terminated within this contract, and that has been the real area that we have, focused our conversation on the last couple of weeks. And, it's going to take a time and a while to get there, but I really and truly, the case study that will come out on these 10-year contracts, I think is going to be fascinating because, look, I mean, there's some type of human nature that has to be studied behind it. There has to be some type of intent of where the motive is. I mean, what is the motivation? I mean, to me, Kelly looks very unmotivated. And that's just being honest. I'm just giving an assessment of, like, the person that I'm looking at. It's easy to go up there and say, yeah, it's my fault. We'll fix it. We got to make sure and do that. We got to get better. We got to really grit down and get in there and roll our sleeves up and, get in there and work together and give all the cliches. I mean, it's easy to take those bullets, stand in front of that microphone, in my opinion, when that check is clearing every other week for, what does he make it? $300,000, $500,000, $400,000?
$750,000 a game.
I mean, man, I'm not saying.
Did you what go? Oh man, I can't believe why'd you do that?
All about money, but I mean, like 10 years, and you're in year 3. All of that money's guaranteed. What's the real motive, right? Like, I mean, I heard Will Campbell say in the preseason that 10 wins get you fired around here. Mm-hmm. What happens if it's 8? Nothing. Nothing does, because LSU does not have the capital to pay $61 million of a buyout to a head coach. That's just the tip of the iceberg when you talk about having to go out and find another coach, having to buy out some of the current, maybe all of the current staff that is on the payroll right now, going out and finding another staff. And, oh, by the way, trying to have enough money to have a roster.
You got to pay them too.
Like, it's LSU is not in a position to even discuss, to even have on the table the conversation of firing Brian Kelly. So anyone who thinks that is feasible, that is an option, stop. It's not. They can't afford it. It is financially impossible for LSU to accomplish at this point. With everything they're on the hook for everything that you have to be committed to be competitive in college football. It ain't happening. But in my opinion, the money is the issue. The money is the problem. the money in its guaranteed contractual status for more than 7 more seasons, totaling more than $60 million, all of which is guaranteed, is, to me, the root of what you're looking at of someone who is unorganized, disinterested, and out of touch with his team. That's as simple as I can say it. I mean, stop me if I'm wrong. Please get inside of the chat and let me know if it's, to me, it's that simple. It really is. I mean, we told you, Jimmy Ott made the comment last week publicly. People have come out and started to really say it a lot more. We recognized it on the show last week. There's a lot of people around LSU that when talk about Brian Kelly, they ask, where is he? This is the same coach 3 weeks into training camp that didn't know Trey'Dez Green was number 14. Trey'Dez Green, the number 1 player in the state, a guy that had been there since spring, somebody who was making plays every single day in practice. 3 weeks in, he was calling him number 14. I mean, come on. If you're a head coach of LSU football 3 weeks into camp, wouldn't you think you know who Trey'Dez Green is? And look, I know he's got 105 guys that he's looking at. I know he could have had a simple brain fart, but that happened a lot. I mean, he called J.R. Belton, J.K. Belton for
2 years now.
A year and a half. J.R. Belton's the one that got Trey'Dez Green. You know what I mean? Like, he's a very important figure in the organization. You want to remember his name. You may not remember everybody's name, but let's make sure when we get out and talk in front of the media and we talk to the microphone, the one guy that all of these recruits know is definitely J.R. Belton. So when the head coach is calling him J.K. Bolton or J.K. John, whatever it is, you know, it's like,
it's a bad look.
Did you go to work today? Have you talked to this guy? I mean, this guy's he's closing Keelan Moses for you. I mean, he's keeping in touch with Bryce Underwood. Like, this guy's a very important figure in the organization. Right?
That's where Glimmer Fredette says this in the chat, and this is, I think, rings true, and I think a lot of why people feel the way that they do today. Glimmer, the last thing people here will tolerate is the coach caring less than they do.